All right. Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to Silicon Dragon. It's a very unique program we have tonight. It's broadcasting actually from 3 different time zones. Silicon Valley, China, Sydney. It's amazing. So here we are in our global world today. We have a great program lined up for you, and I know some of you are still logging on right now. So we will show a few slides while you're getting ready. Silicon Dragon started 10 years ago, and amazingly enough, we have gone through the various cycles of 10 years and now this latest year where we had to move our event series online. But I'm enjoying the online forums, and I hope everyone is as well. We started our Ask a VC series, Ask a VC Anything series in April, and we've been holding that almost every week with a different VC from around the world. So those are quite a lot of fun. We also have my Silicon Dragon newsletter, so hopefully everyone's been reading that. We are on Twitter, of course. We're on WeChat. I don't know for how much longer, but we are right now. We have our Circle membership. And of course, we have my 3 books here, Tech Titans of China, Silicon Dragon, and Startup Asia. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening or this morning. If you'd like to know more about what we're doing, you can go to our mobile app or go to our website, silicondragonventures.com. Okay? So tonight, as I mentioned, it's a very global forum. In Australia, Sydney right now it's 9 a.m. In Shanghai, we have a speaker from Shanghai today. It's 7 a.m. Thank you for getting up so early. In California, it's 4 p.m. and New York time, East Coast time, 7 p.m. And sorry, Europeans, if you're missing out, but we do have a replay of the entire forum. So please sign up for the replay and we'll get you the link for the replay, okay? So as you can see here, we do have 2 wonderful sponsors for our program. KPMG, our longtime partner, and Northridge Partners. So thank you, KPMG and Northridge Partners. We couldn't do it without you and without all of our speakers in our audience as well. So today we're bringing you Silicon Dragon online from Sydney, from China, from Silicon Valley. And we're going to be about to start now with a welcome from James Mabbott, the partner in charge of KPMG Innovate. And James, perhaps you would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, and I guess also good evening, as Rebecca has noted. Welcome to Silicon Dragon Sydney 2020. Here we are in search of the next tech titan. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. In my case today, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land we meet and pay my respect to their elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. On behalf of KPMG, I also extend a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for today's event, wherever you may be. My name is, as Rebecca mentioned, James Mabbott, and I'm the National Leader for KPMG Innovate. And our focus is on working with clients to explore new business models, future trends, and innovative technology in response to disruption to drive growth. It is the 4th visit, albeit virtual this time, to our shores by Rebecca and Silicon Dragon. It's an event with which we have had a long association, and one that always shines a light on local and regional trends in innovation and venture capital. And just 2 weeks ago, here in Australia, KPMG released our Venture Pulse report. Amanda Price, a good friend of mine and colleague in the firm, published that report and highlighted that investment into Australian startups has actually hit a new high over the first 6 months of 2020. reaching US $945 million. And so this is up from US $627 million for the same period a year ago. And that's a significant increase of around about $318 million. And I guess part of that is that when you think about that, and in particular, when you look at April to June last year and compare it to this year, there was actually a 38% increase. And some of us sort of sit here and go, well, why is that? When the economy looks so dire, we're in the midst of a health crisis, why are we seeing money continue to go into startups? What's driving this? And in part, and hopefully we'll hear from some of the discussion today, this is because investors see this particular crisis as creating some positive tailwinds for technology businesses, which means the flow of money going into startups isn't yet being impacted in the same way it was in other crises. And indeed, if we reflect on the need to protect our workplaces, to digitise our businesses, to provide employees with the ability to work from anywhere, to customers increasingly looking to shop and pay online, and the potential for diversification of supply chains, there are clear roles for and a need for innovative high-growth tech businesses in all of those areas. And if we want to accelerate our economic recovery, that means investing now. So technologies such as AI, blockchain, IoT, augmented and virtual reality, amongst a host of others, are likely to get accelerated uptake. And as companies, governments and society adapt to the current health and economic crisis, we will see money flow in these directions. And it's been interesting because in the last couple of weeks, we've also heard people like Matt Common, the CEO of CBA, a big bank here in Australia, come out and say technology will be key or the key to economic success post-COVID-19. And locally, Square Peg co-founder Paul Bassett described investment as technology as a national imperative to solve the looming employment crisis from COVID-19. So with that in mind, once again, on behalf of KPMG, thank you for attending today's event. I'd especially like to thank our speakers for joining us today. As noted, we've got multiple time zones in play. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the insights and greatly appreciate you all taking the time to join us. So without further ado, it's back to you, Rebecca, for the first panel.
Okay, well, thank you, James. I really appreciate it. I appreciate our long time partnership as well. As James said, this is our 4th event in Sydney, and we always enjoy coming back to Australia, even virtually. And I know how much the venture capital scene has grown over the past several years with some unicorns and some good successes, and a lot of new fundraising lately too. So we'll be talking about that as we dive into our program. Our first panel will be coming up very soon, and we'll be talking to a number of experts about scaling up. This is a perennial issue in a market that is fast emerging, like Australia is, and we have a number of experts here from Incubators and Accelerators and various scaling up avenues. And I'd like to welcome Duco van Breemen from Haymarket HQ, Santiago James Mateos from ThoughtBox Asia, Robert Scott, Australia China Tech Incubator. He's joining us from Shanghai. And finally, Alfred Lowe from Startmate. So thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully all of you will be on the screen now. Very good. That worked. All right. So let me just start off with some broad overview questions. And I would also encourage all the people who are listening in, the attendees, that you can use the chat box below to type in a question. And I'll be monitoring this chat box over here for the best questions. And then I will speak them and we'll get answers from our panelists. That'll be toward the end of this first panel. Okay, so Duco, Alfred, Santiago, and Rob. Duco, why don't we start with you? Each one of you just give a few words about what you do, what your company does, what your role is.
So I'm originally from Holland, spent 8 years in China where I worked in sort of facilitating deep tech into the market. And in the past 4 years, I've been in Sydney, Australia, where I helped set up Haymarket HQ. We are a not-for-profit organization supporting tech startups go into Asia, as well as Asian companies coming here. And in the past few years, we've started focusing a bit more on digital programming. So that includes setting up, for instance, the City of Sydney's first program to help companies come into the market, which has facilitated about $800 million of companies to come in. And also, we've helped about 400 companies to go into China through a digital program that we developed with Alibaba, KPMG Wise, and several others, including Australia Post. So that's a little bit of what we do. So it's all around helping companies go into Asia and Asian companies come into Australia. Okay,
very good. Sounds like a very active highway. Alfred, how about you? Tell us about Startmate and your own background.
Well, I'm one of the partners at Startmate. Startmate is Australia's probably longest running tech accelerator program. I think it was 2012 was our first cohort, maybe it was 2011. We've invested in over 110 startups over the years. The valuation of all our companies combined is over $1 billion. So Startmate is, but the very special thing about Startmate is that it's mentor and advisory based from Australia's own startup tech community. And we all actually invest our own money into backing the cohort, the companies that go through our program. We're currently just finishing off our first cohort in New Zealand. It's a big step for Startmate. And we run programs in Sydney and Melbourne every year. We also run a program called Startmate Fellowship, which is about bringing in more talent into the Australian tech ecosystem. And that's a broader project that we're working on.
Okay, thank you, Alfred. Santiago?
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone tuning in. ThoughtBox Asia consults to startups and corporates going into Asian markets in the areas of leadership, digital innovation, and collaboration across cultures. My personal perspective comes from working with a local tech entrepreneur in China to build, scale, and sell his company, and also from working across 3 levels of government in Japan. So welcome to everyone tuning in and look forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you. Well, very good. Rob, last but not least, Rob.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, Australia-China Technology Incubator is based around healthcare. So I've been based here in Shanghai, and I'm having an early start. So welcome to everyone here this morning. For around 12 years now, engaged in China for around 20, and focused just in the healthcare sector. So we've had around 200 startups, scale-up companies go through our programs, the boot camps and our immersive programs here in China over the last 2 years alone, and some really good successes coming out of that. And really, one, I guess, winner of, to some extent, of COVID now, I suppose, is the healthcare sector. So we're certainly seeing a lot of interest in terms of Australian and US technologies into the China market.
Okay, very good. Since we've already heard the word COVID a couple of times, I'd like to ask you a question about how COVID is impacting your own business. What are you seeing among the startups that you're advising, that you're mentoring? How are they coping? How are you coping?
Well, from our perspective, Rebecca, it's been one, as I said, of quite a number of the companies coming through here, and we've brought a couple of dozen through into the programs in China over the last 12 months. Companies which have a specific technology solution for China, which is really critical to any company coming into an Asian market. You need to have a solution that actually fits the actual problems here in country. Those are the ones, whether it's been using UV cleaning, for example, of one of our companies into hospitals, whether it's actually been around development of vaccine technologies, therapeutic, diagnostic, sort of testing, and other areas within the biomedical sphere. we're seeing, a number of our actually being, getting immediate sort of outcomes, so increased outcomes and likelihood of and sales, basically, in China.
I see. Yeah, no, I would think that right now these companies need more help than ever in scaling up. And, some of them is kind of a survival of the fittest strategy, isn't it? Duco, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to answer your question, we have co-working space as well as digital programming. Now, I don't think it's very hard to guess which one sort of suffered the most.
Yeah.
Co-working spaces are not as popular as they used to be. But fortunately, we've been pretty proactive with COVID-19. So we can only at the moment have about 50% capacity because of the 4 square meter rule that we have in Australia and 1.5. But that 50% is 100% utilized. So we're doing better than our peers in that regard, and that's because we're making it very hard to get in the door with mandatory testing, blood oxygen level testing, you name it, before you can even get in. So that's helped us with the co-working space offering. In terms of our digital programming, we're actually getting a lot of interest from government. So for instance, national trade organizations as well as for state trade organizations, both here and abroad, because we occupy a bit of a funny space in the market, and that is in that tech innovation cross-border space. So that's been actually quite exciting. Let's see what comes out of that. As for our startups, a few have grown considerably, and a few have crashed. Those, for instance, in the medical field here, suddenly we're able to, in the telehealth field, I should say, have been able to grow significantly because of relaxed legislation around that here. Those, for instance, targeting the Chinese diaspora within Australia, which tends to be a very lucrative market, have had it a little bit tough. COVID hit in China in what was it, end of January. That's when it was there before, but that's really when it became seriously. And that happens to coincide with Chinese New Year. And that meant that most of the Chinese international students in China or that are based in Australia were in China at that point. And that's also when the Australian government decided to close their doors to anyone. So a lot of, I think, 100 to 200,000 Chinese students are currently stranded abroad, so to say, and are not able to come into Australia. Now, that's been had a huge impact on Australian universities and generally on our economy, that being the 3rd largest export for the country, followed by tourism, the 4th largest export, which obviously is also suffering. But like I've mentioned in the past, in our previous catch-up, one thing that we do see here is that despite our worsened relations with China, our exports to China have significantly increased from 30% of all exports to about 43 or so % of exports now. And that's not just commodities, that's not just iron ore, that's fine foods, that's fashion, you name it. So yeah, you see some thrive and others, not so much.
Right. Yeah, it really depends on what sector you're in, I think. And certainly the whole biotech field is exploding. So Rob, from your side in China, what are you seeing?
Well, obviously, I guess to echo sort of Duco's points, Rebecca, there's certainly been an increase in online sort of healthcare provision. One thing we're seeing is groups like We Doctor, which is sort of run by Tencent, have exploded in terms of usage during the COVID sort of crisis, particularly. And similarly, technologies coming in from overseas as well has been, ones which are already applied in their own home market have been more, I guess, readily accepted here to some extent. If provided you can show a direct pathway to market, and that's something that we help our companies for a lot in terms of helping them sort of work with the industry partners and the investors here to get a beachhead to establish their business and actually develop those channels to market, which is very, very critical. But all those healthcare, products, wellness as well. I think there's been obviously a steady flow of supplements, the kind of Blackmores and Swiss and so on. So, but we've had startup or early stage companies selling, nutraceutical and other sort of healthcare products again in the marketplace here, because there's an increased need for people to be well, to be just to, you know, not just to get better, but actually maintain their wellness is a big part of Asian culture. It's not just to get better, but actually stay well. And so any companies coming in that sector, and fortunately for us, it's actually our you know, exclusive sector that we focus on, health and medical, have done really, really well, you know. And I mean, China is the second largest healthcare sector in the world, over $1 trillion US in terms of their healthcare system. You know, you have hundreds of millions of people with cardiovascular issues. You've got the second or third largest cohort, over, you know, 100 million diabetic sort of sufferers here in country. A lot of people affected by smoking, air pollution. So there's always a lot of good opportunities in the healthcare sector. We haven't seen those diminished at all. And similarly, we haven't seen much diminishment of funding from VC, from early stage investors we've worked with either.
Well, that's good. Yeah, it does seem that the VC has held up. Santiago, how has COVID-19 impacted what you're doing and what your startups are doing?
A couple of things. So COVID hasn't stopped Dr. Andrew Cooper and Leapfrog Investments from ramping up investments in India. They see the rapid acceleration of digitization that we can see in the pandemic, but particularly in high growth emerging markets, as a big opportunity. So the show goes on, and just one thing from experience that I've learned, this is pre-pandemic, but the lessons are still applicable to digital business models now. This startup that went on to raise money was SoftBank. All of the initial demand validation and product market fit was done out of market, but in market digitally. So, you know, that gave them enough traction and insights and data to fuel further strategies in the next chapter. So for a digital business model, certainly when one door closes, another opens, and there are still opportunities to move forward. So if we keep open-minded, there are still possibilities out there.
So are Australian startups still trying to cross the bridge, go global? Is that still a #1 objective, or has that changed now?
I think that, you know, with COVID and also dynamics in the region, many businesses are still pursuing opportunities across Asia, but they're not perhaps trumpeting it, everything that they're doing. And they don't always do so either, because sometimes they can be punished by financial analysts. So I'll give an example. REA Group, a large property portal here, they have a continuing astute pan-Asia growth strategy. They have different strategies, different products in different markets across Asia, but also the US. I recall when announcing the entry into a new Asian market, the CEO literally said, not going to bet their house on it, but they've got to work, and they've built you know, new revenue opportunities. They've created value for their shareholders, and their share prices outperform their direct competitors. But importantly, they've also built new competencies and capacity. So I think that will help them in future. So the show goes on, but I think that the scene is a little bit quieter at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think particularly going into China.
Yeah, we've seen, I guess, and from the Australian perspective, Rebecca, obviously a lot of this is affected by the current sort of geopolitical sort of issues that we're sort of, you know, I guess, with these countries bilaterally, and the media, unfortunately, as well, which tends to sort of focus on the negative as opposed to the positive. So I think the overall position has been one of really, it's hard to tell because of the COVID restrictions as to interest level. I mean, we've done previous webinars ourselves in the last couple of months, and had you know, over 100 participants in those webinars. So there's strong interest, I think, in China. I mean, we're as an organisation, ACTI is expanding into Southeast Asia as well with a new program with Life Science Queensland and QUT. So targeting Singapore, ASEAN markets. So we're and Hong Kong, we're expanding into those sort of regions. And we see that as a you know, China isn't for everyone. It's a fantastic opportunity, but there is you know, and we can talk about this a little bit later, there are challenges in the market that need to be a lot of work to overcome in some instances. Hong Kong, Singapore can be good intermediary sort of steps, not huge markets in themselves, good sort of landing pads for a China entry. And we're exploring those with our partners at the moment, and we're seeing very strong interest in those markets, but overall in China generally, I think, as well.
Right. So the Australian scene, from my previous visits and interviews in Sydney, it always was, well, Silicon Valley is the place that everyone wants to go, right? If you don't make it in Silicon Valley like Atlassian did, then you don't really count. Is that still the case, or can you just stay within the Australian market and make it?
I think that depends on how big you want to grow, right? It's, I think there are plenty of companies that do quite well within Australia, but if we want to, I think the biggest challenge that Australia at the moment has is the inability to commercialize technology and skill and also export that. And the country is now therefore, I think, prioritizing developing defensible technologies that can actually generate sustainable competitive advantage for the country. So I think Australian startups are definitely still keen to go to the US. I think many have received a lot of venture funding from some of the investors actually here in the room today, and that are very much in a position to expand. I don't know to what extent they're still interested in that. And I think Alfred and Bill would likely have a few ideas on that as well.
Sure, yeah, Alfred?
I think Australia, obviously, a market that's of 25 million people. It's quite a big domestic, market in itself. However, compared to some other tech ecosystems, which are much smaller, but have, as a consequence, they've had to think global from day one, much earlier. In fact, immediately. Like countries like Singapore, like Israel, like New Zealand, they just haven't been able to afford just selling domestically and doing that for a long time, or even just doing that in itself being enough to build a big business. Australia has had the benefit of doing that. Some of the companies that have been mentioned today already, like Seek and REA and car sales. So they are some of the oldest and biggest of Australia's tech successes from way back in the original tech boom in the early 2000s. But a lot of their business is built off being a domestic marketplace. I think that's changing now, but Australian entrepreneurs, they don't have the forcing function that other ecosystems have that force them to sell internationally straight away. And I think, as an advisor and a mentor to many startups, I always encourage that for Aussie founders to think bigger, earlier.
Yeah. So do Aussie startup founders actually, do they think big enough, dream big enough? I
think what's important for any ecosystem is the trailblazers and the poster children that come before them. I think we 10 years ago, in 2010, there were really no credible VC funds in the country. I don't think Atlassian was even a household name then. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, actually. There were no accelerator programs, there were no co-working spaces. I don't think there was any real deliberate policy from a government level to build this ecosystem. I think it's really changed now. So it'll take a generation, but it'll pull through more and more founders with more and more ambition and more and more skills. And it's not just founders, it's the whole village, right? We need great investors. We need great skills. Not everyone is a founder. We need great employees as well.
Right, yeah, it's the village, right. So what do you think that Atlassian founders did right, Canva founders did right? Since all of you are advising startups and mentoring them and helping them to grow, what did these other really successful Australian tech startups do right that you can advise your generation of startups to do. What did they do right? And what did they do wrong? Anything that they did wrong that maybe you could advise your startups not to do?
In Australia, we don't have that many Canva type startups that are actually building a local team, say in China, with new products and new features, which is more complex than just offering multiple languages. But they've just marked 2 years on the ground in China, and I've heard they've leveraged a lot of their English code base, but customized for their .cn web and mobile products. And the focus is on helping customers there create content for WeChat and other local platforms. And they've built a lot of strong product and marketing partnerships. Another example, I'm curious to see how Hivery goes in Japan. They're an Australian AI startup providing insights to retailers. The founder was pretty open-minded about opportunities around Asia and around the world. And in his research, discovered that in one application, AI for vending machines, some clients in the US had, say, 100,000 machines, and there were potential clients in Japan with millions. So they're also building a local team on the ground, building trust with customers and potential customers over time, because it takes a bit of time. And they're also looking at customizing their product where possible for local needs. So I think they'll do well too.
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like a good example. Anyone else want to chime in on answering the question about what did Atlassian and Canva do right? How did they become so successful? What did they do? What did the founders do that other Australian startups haven't done yet?
I think they've each had their own story to their success. I think Atlassian's success is quite different to how Canva's gone about to do to become so successful. In Canva's, you know, what a great team they pulled together. They have such product vision. I think they surrounded themselves with really great people. Had great investors early on. It was a very different time when Canva was founded to when Atlassian was founded. I think Atlassian was founded in the early 2000s, and their funding was very different to how Canva's funding happened. They bootstrapped it all the way, and in fact, they didn't raise money until way later. I think their first round was in the hundreds of millions, as opposed to Canva's. And Canva had not the benefit, but the timing for them was they rose during the, Bill would certainly know better than I. He was part of the Blackbird team that invested in Canva's first round. But they benefited from a period in the Australian tech ecosystem which started to have venture capital funding and a growing base of supporters and talent, which was very foreign to Australia at the time.
Melanie, the co-founder of Canva, was able to tap into the Silicon Valley venture scene partly through going to Perth and participating in Bill Tye's
Charles River
kiteboarding contests there, and then she gets a introduction to all these other Silicon Valley VCs, and suddenly Canva,
That's right. And Mel's hustle is phenomenal, and what a great story about how she got that first chance with Bill Tye.
So not every Australian startup can do that, however. But let me. Anyone have any idea about what the next tech titan will be from Australia? What field will it be in? What will be its first overseas market?
Well, I like to think, and I'm obviously a little bit biased here, but I think, if we look at the Australian economy, there's obviously a few industries that really stand out in which we have significant advantages over other countries, such as agriculture technology, medical devices, educational technologies. This is where you see a lot of great companies sort of come from. I think there are a few now in the ag tech space that are quite interesting to keep an eye out on, as well as in the deep tech space, like Abyss Solutions, which is going quite strong. So I think, you know, what does the next unicorn look like from Australia? Probably a very diverse team that's been able to capitalize on Asia, hence why I said a little bit biased here because of the whole Asia focus of this place. But I do see that's where the opportunity is. 2/3 of the world middle class will be there in 2030. We are in an amazing position to capitalize on this. Many people seem to forget, especially those abroad, and I was one of them, that Australia is actually incredibly multicultural. If you look at Sydney, the city I'm in at the moment, 60% of the people that are resident here were born abroad, including myself, and about 80% of the people behind me. We have a very interesting migration program that allows us to attract very high-skilled migrants, again, mostly from Asia, and using that currently underutilized talent pool of diverse talent, of Asia-capable people that are literally in our backyard, I think will be the key to our success in the coming 10 years. That, together with, you know, the ability to commercialize this technology, that research that we have, that, you know, we have amazing research capabilities, and we're now just started, I think, to really commercialize that at scale through, for instance, companies like Cicada Innovations that Alfred was involved with, but also venture funds like Main Sequence Ventures. You know, that's where I see the future of Australia, and hopefully that will come to fruition.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, Alfred.
I really concur with what Duco said. I think the last 10 odd years, Australia's traded on not really leveraging any systemic advantage, country competitive advantage. And I think now it's trying to focus in on areas where it does have systemic advantage, such as agri-food tech, such as med tech. They have its own challenges, but you know, they're already big industries that we have here. How do we channel that talent, those relationships into big export markets? And apply technology, you know, rather than commodity focused, how to be technology and knowledge focused.
So one of the trends I've been watching is the China tech investment from the big tech companies like Tencent and Alibaba into Southeast Asia. Is this a path for Australian startups, Australia's emerging companies, Australia's leading tech companies to get into Southeast Asia? It seems that there's a lot of attention these days on Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think, Rebecca, this is part of the China sort of Belt and Road sort of strategy. So, which is, for those who don't know, is a major initiative, I guess, from Chinese government, but also with industry and major players like, as you said, you know, Alibaba, Tencent, and so on. And that's, I think, for Australia companies to leverage that or to benefit from that, we have to get on the board a bit more to highlight ourselves, to get a bit more publicly, at least in terms of the Chinese industry mindset, what our talents are and what our capabilities and successes are. I guess not just in the China market, but in other markets that perhaps are not as well known by Chinese investors and Chinese partners coming in. So, you know, looking at companies, you know, for example, which have done really well here, the groups like Juwai, you know, the online property group that, you know, built up over 3 years and sold for, you know, 30 million or so. Airwallex, which has got millions of dollars coming in, you know, in terms of Chinese investment, and others coming in who have benefited either directly or in, you know, countries like Singapore and Hong Kong and elsewhere from investors. It's really about A, reaching out to those investors, B, being flexible and understanding and adapting the technologies for, as I said at the start, to solve the problems of those countries. So if they're going into ASEAN, and we're helping companies now do that, to look at those specific problems, not just try to have an Asia-wide strategy or even an ASEAN-wide strategy, but actually look at specific problems, partner with specific sort of industry partners of note, and get on the board, so to speak, with investors, whether from China or locally, that actually are interested and see a great opportunity and will come on board with a good investment to help grow. I think that's the key sort of element, and we often miss that. I think in Australia, we don't sort of we hide our light under a bushel a bit more than we should be, I think.
Okay. Well, so from a Silicon Valley perspective, one of the big issues is China and the pushback against China tech and its growing power. And now we've seen President Trump talk about a ban on WeChat, a ban on TikTok. Is this impacting the way Australian startups think about going global, going into US, China? Are they using, is this going to hurt them in any way, hinder them in any way, create a new avenue for Australian startups to fill the gap? Let's say if WeChat gets banned or TikTok gets banned, maybe an Australian startup comes along that, you know, doesn't have these issues. I mean, how is this being looked at in China, in Australia today?
I think Australia is in a tough spot in the sense that, you know, we're best friends with the US. We have a horrible relationship with China, but they're our best customer. So we're in a sort of funny situation. Obviously, a lot of these, you know, measures that Trump is now pushing forward are sort of politically driven, and we'll have to see what actually happens.
Right.
So I'm not too worried yet. Generally, I think business finds a way to still make money regardless of a WeChat. We were able to do so before WeChat. We did that over QQ. What is the next one? I don't know. Probably not email in the case of China, but I'm sure we'll find something. There's obviously also very strong tensions between China and Australia at the moment. I think China and, well, nearly any country at the moment. You know, I'm Dutch. I mean, we even have issues with China, and we're a country of 16 million people. So I think, you know, China has never enjoyed a very strong reputation abroad. Who's to blame? You know, that's a very complicated story. But at the moment, if you look at the organizations that operate in the China-Australia space, there's been huge changes. Leaders stepping away from it because of all that scrutiny and because of all the blame saying you're pushing a pro-China agenda. Now, that's the case politically. If you talk to small business, they don't care. They just simply want to sell their wines, they want to sell their medicine, they want to sell their technologies, whichever way is possible. So I think generally from the startups we speak to, they see it as a hiccup, but they're not necessarily saying, look, because of these relations, we're not going to do that. But if anything, Southeast Asia is obviously becoming a little bit more interesting to them. Cost to enter is lower. The same sales channels. You don't have to deal with the WeChat. You don't have to deal with the Great Firewall, and a lot less competitive. Yeah,
good points. All right, well, we do have a question here that came in from an audience member. He's actually here from New York, but he's asking about how the Australia-China relationship might change if Biden is elected.
I don't know enough about what Biden is proposing, so it's hard for me to answer that question. I think, you know, obviously the Australian government has quite sided with the US, although recently we started investing in our own defense technologies, which is the first time ever that we've decided to do so on the premise that we may have to go at it alone. Right, so that's quite a significant step for the country here. So what would change if Biden steps in? I don't know. I don't know what Biden will do. Hopefully, you know, I do think that it's going to be hard to worsen the relationship with China. So if anything, hopefully it will improve for all of us.
Yeah.
One thing I have heard is that one thing that is unilateral between the Republicans and the Democrats is a view on China, on the US. I presume that under Biden, the administration won't be as hawkish, but I still think there is going to be ensuing tensions between the US and China, regardless of who's elected in November.
Yeah, well, we'll know pretty soon. We have to get through the next few months of a lot of campaigning and probably a lot of friction, but a lot of uncertainty as well. There seems to be a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. Do you think that there's that could change, that this kind of uncertain period of COVID-19 and political issues in US and China and Australia, tech tensions, it's created, there's a lot of noise in the market, there's a lot of uncertainty. Does this impact startups, or are they just kind of immune to that? They just do their own thing no matter what?
I think it's it is quite hard. It's been harder now to crystal ball anything than any other time in recent history. I think it's just, travel restrictions, trade tensions, cold war, hot war type stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really hard to figure out what's going to come next. But it all trickles down to companies and businesses, and tech companies no different. How do they plan their market expansions or their opportunities that they see for products going back to problems to solve? I think that's...
Are all of you back to the office? It looks like Duco is, but it doesn't look like, I'm not sure about Santiago. Are all of you back to the office yet or not?
Well, from Chong's perspective, things are pretty normal. They've been largely business as usual. I'm not in the office today because it's a bit early, but no, it's certainly last 6 months has been really largely business as usual here. You know, unlike happening in other countries, unfortunately. So, for our perspective, yeah, but of course, where the cross-border side, of course, is heavily impacted, and we've moved to format as we all have.
Right. So, Rob, are you working from an office yet or not?
Yeah, we still have our access to our office. So I go in occasionally, but not as often as I used to. So I think COVID, one benefit has been probably doing more things from home, or doing more things from other locations than previously. It's not sort of structured pathway, getting up, commuting office every day, come back. I think we're all sort of looking at a bit of a different model now of working, and I think that's probably continued.
Yeah, definitely. Remote working has certainly taken off, and Zoom has certainly taken off. Well, thank you very much for your time and your remarks. It was very insightful, and I would encourage the audience to keep those questions coming through either the chat box below or the question and answer below. So thank you, Duco, Alfred, Rob, Santiago. Thank you for joining us. And please listen in to our next segment, which I'm going to be introducing in a second as soon as I see George here. And I'm going to share the screen to... Hi, George. How are you?
How are you doing?
Good, good. So we're going to be welcoming George Cheung, who is a founder and head of Asia Pacific for Innovusion LiDAR. And George, very interesting, works from Sunnyvale and he works from Sydney. But right now he's been working a lot from Sydney because of, well, we know why, because of COVID. But hi, George, how are you today?
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic, Rebecca. And Sydney, Australia is a wonderful place. And we've just won a big deal last week. And so we have a customer right now in, originally in Victoria, in Western Australia, but now we have customers in Sydney. So we're really delighted.
Okay, well, good, George. Well, why don't you first tell me or tell all of us about what your company does. What does Innovusion do? I read up quite a bit on LiDAR, so I understand LiDAR now, but why don't you tell everyone else who didn't have the benefit of this early warning about you being on the program. Tell us about LiDAR and why Innovusion is so great in it. Fantastic.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I think everybody knows about camera, right? Camera and, traditionally, when you want to do optical sensing, you use camera and radar. Yeah. But, quickly said, the difference between camera and LiDAR is that with camera, you can see about 120 meters, but with LiDAR, I can see all the way out to 450 meters. With camera, you can have a optical distortion after 100 meters. And, but with LiDAR, I have my own light source and I can see everything independent of the light situation. I have 300 lines of resolution, and compared to radar, which is poor rendering, traditional camera, which you can use in either in a autonomous vehicle, stationary platform on a straight intersection, only have 2D representation. Radar only point. I actually see a 3D representation of the scene I'm watching. I'm actually shooting out 300 laser beams, forwards on a 100 by 40 configuration to get a field of view. Right. And I can measure distance. And I'll throw you this is that, Rebecca, I can actually look at a scene, a room. I can look at a scene in Martin's place to see if people are actually following the distancing measurement. I can see moving and stationary items. And I mean, coming back to Australia is that we are very active in working with the mining industry, right, in terms of the haul trucks. And we work with the transportation departments in different states in Australia, and we already have a success story there. We even have our LiDAR being put on a drone and flying through and, just do a full survey of either a city scene or a mining scene or a traffic scenario. We work with subways and rails, in that scenario, and truck convoys. And I can show a 10-second PowerPoint of our of our video.
Tell us. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you're involved in smart city. That your technology is used in smart city. It's used in autonomous driving. Those are two really hot areas right now: smart city and autonomous driving. So you must be your company must be growing very fast because these sectors are booming.
Exactly, Rebecca. I can compare to even though we have a more a slow economy, we're hiring in Australia, we're hiring in Hong Kong, we're hiring in the United States. So we're very active. But in terms of to give an example, is that before then, like let's say the corner of George and Market Street, if the Transport New South Wales want to look at how many cars have gone through, how many motorcycles have gone through, somebody actually sit there with a board and ticks. I can put a stationary LiDAR there and it measure everything automatically. I can tell you if it's a double-decker bus or if it's a Toyota Corolla or a motorcycle. So object classification software. And at the same time, in terms of autonomous vehicle space, we work closely with Nefia, from France, from Neons. And together is that they can then scan from their shuttles. They can scan all the way to, 300 meters, 400 meters. And, and that space is quite exciting, yeah.
Okay, so a question came in from the audience that I really can't ignore. He wants to know, and you may see the question here, why does Elon Musk claim LiDAR is useless? Where might he be mistaken in this analysis?
Oh, right, exactly. That was that's why I was, talking about, earlier is that, Elon is a very, definitely a very smart person. But when it comes to LiDAR, obviously he doesn't really know a lot in detail about it. But if you compare the camera to a LiDAR, we can see all the way out to 450 meters. We can see independent of light source. And partly is that I think when Elon was talking about, camera is better, camera is good enough. At that time, the cost of LiDAR is quite expensive. It could be $7,000. It would be $7,000 or $100,000. The prices have dropped now all the way, like in our case, to $25,000. And so, it's much more relevant right now compared to using a camera. And we have, like I said, we have small Australian companies. We have, major construction companies, mining company working with us quite closely. And, I listened to the earlier presentation then, is that we're actually quite interested to collaborate with Australian startups in doing trials with our LiDAR, which we already are working with a number of universities in Australia, for cooperation and R&D. And we really enjoy, the kind of expertise, the kind of scientific advance Australian universities and Australian engineers can contribute, to what we're doing.
Right, so you're straddling these two worlds of Australia and China, or three worlds, Australia, China, the US. And so how are you seeing all the tensions today, the frictions today, the COVID-19 today impacting your business?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, how is COVID-19, I'll just ask one part of it, how is COVID-19 impacting your business?
Right, Rebecca, originally we were fearful, like what are we going to do with installations and also introduction of our technology.
Yeah.
What we have found out is that, we actually did it first with Singapore, is that with a customer there wanting to do a very detailed, specific measurement of objects, right, flying in the air. I'll let you think about what that would be. But, we were able to then clone their laptop in Singapore with our laptop in Sunnyvale, California. We're based in Sunnyvale, right next to Apple's R&D headquarters for autonomous vehicle. After cloning that, we were able to just spend the next 2 days working with them to replicate the whole experiment. With that kind of experiment, we were able to then, did the whole trial testing, did the whole, conclusion of it. And then they actually bought a number of our systems. And, the installation we've done in Sydney, everything is done remotely, all the way from Silicon Valley. And
all the R&D is done in Silicon Valley.
Right now, all our R&D is done in Silicon Valley. We have some, we are doing some collaboration with both Australian universities and also major Australian companies, that is focused, for example, on the mining side, transportation side, drones, and also truck convoys. Truck convoys that carry about 800,000 tons of iron ore. And as I said, we are quite active in Western Australia, and our LiDARs already operating in the Pilbara, under dust, rain, and IP68 conditions.
I see. What are your three biggest markets geographically?
Geographically, right now, if I talk about APAC, definitely, is working with smart city, transportation infrastructure. The second one is definitely in terms of autonomous vehicles, working with like Navia, Neo, Easy Mouse, and the third one would be definitely in terms of mining, robotics, those areas. And
what countries? What are the top three countries?
Oh, the top country we're operating, we really like the Australian, the market in Australia. Australia is a huge market for us. And we work very closely with Singapore. One of our, key customers is the major conglomerate there. We also operate in Hong Kong and Taiwan.
I see.
And,
okay.
And we also work with a lot of Silicon Valley firms here together. Like, sometimes you can't go to Transport New South Wales and say, oh, we have a LiDAR, right? So we work with major business partner, system integrators, including companies like, could be KPMG, to offer a fully integrated solutions.
Right.
Because, just like what I've just showed is that we can scan the rail, the tunnels, easily.
Yeah, it sounds like you've nailed the technology. So what is your biggest challenge then? And I know you've actually raised some pretty significant venture capital financing too, 30 million already.
Exactly.
So what kind of challenges do you face? What's your biggest challenge in growth?
Okay, we currently, we have raised $30 million from, Neo Capital, Fidelity, Agrose, and private investors. We're currently in our second A++ round of raising 15 million, which we have already locked down 5 million. So we're waiting for 10 more millions to come through. And we are actively talking to both VCs back in Silicon Valley, including Stanford Management Company, where, I came from with Stanford Business School. And also VCs in Hong Kong and Singapore. And I must say the Singaporeans are very active, in terms of EDB, Economic Development Board in Singapore, to welcome industry into the country and collaborate. And that is one area, Rebecca, I think Australia really needs to step up. Look at how Singapore attract autonomous vehicle companies like Active, like Autonomy, to go into the city, to the country. Nefia, they built a whole test ground for autonomous vehicle, in Singapore, right? And then pharmaceuticals, robotics, and if we build up a lab in Singapore, which we are also considering, is that there's going to be all kind of there's all kind of credits for our engineers, for them to train back in Silicon Valley. For us to send our equipment from Sunnyvale, to send our engineers into Singapore. I know this is an Australian forum, but I think Australia, look at how Singapore.
No, it's a global forum, and you're
a global
right.
forum. I think to a certain extent, Rebecca, you know the Singaporeans, right?
Yeah, well, Smart City is very, they're very advanced with Smart City in Singapore. One of the most advanced in the world. So I'm not surprised you're doing well in Singapore. It's also interesting that you've raised money from China. So Neo Capital, Neo is the electric vehicle maker, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's their venture capital arm.
Exactly, but we raise it from the US arm. So both
from the US side.
Both Neo Capital and also the Fidelity Egg Roll, they are both from the US. Fidelity is actually from UK. I mean, the origin of our company is that look, we all have been educated in the United States, UC Berkeley, Stanford Business School, and Caltech. And so we all have homes in like Los Altos, Sunnyvale, and Campbell. Right. And so it's quite easy for us to go to the Valley and talk to Benchmark or Sequoia, and so that's really our base, and that's really where we have grown from. And I think we chat before, Rebecca. We still see that the best optical technology, optical sensor technology, LiDAR technology, comes from the Silicon Valley, not from not from Singapore, not from China, but it's really from Stanford, the Stanford Electrical Engineering faculty, and also the UC Berkeley, faculty.
I see. Is China catching up with that though?
China is catching up, but a personal view is that it is still tier 2, right? The tier 1 technology still comes from Stanford and also UC Berkeley, and partly it's because look, I mean, that optical sensor space has been so strong in California for a long time.
Sure, I remember visiting Optical Valley in China, in Wuhan. They made such a optical valley. Wow! But you're saying that your technology for your company, the whole optics area, is really centered around Silicon Valley.
Well, I think if you go to our website, which is innovusion.com, I think, Rebecca, is that you can see that, in terms of LiDAR, right? You go from 16 lines to 32 lines to 120 lines. And the more lines you have, the more clearer it is. It's like black and white TV over OLED TV. There is only one company in the United States and in the world who can do 300 lines. And that's us, right? And if you look at the Chinese competitors, LiDAR, okay. They are kind of different,
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I want to ask you one last question. How did you get in this space?
I have an IBM background, so I've always been in technology, but I did also work in inertial navigation systems, which deals with how vehicles can travel like 5 hours, 800 kilometers, without GPS, but able to track its positioning through that area, through that space. Then I was decided that LiDAR is really the future, the way to go, to replacing both in terms of cameras and in terms of radar. And so this is a big thing. And I thought, and to me, like this is the new Google, and this is the new Amazon. We could be, and one day we could be even bigger than Facebook.
Don't let Mark Zuckerberg hear you say that. Or Tim Cook says your office is right next door to Apple. Okay, well, thank you, George. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us. So now, and thank you for those slides too. It's very interesting to see the LiDAR in action.
As I said, you had a panel of incubators. We would welcome them to approach us to do trials using our LiDAR, and we'll provide free of charge.
Okay, All right, you heard it here first. And I'm glad we had it on the replay so everybody can hear it again. Okay, thank you, George. Now, I'd like to move on to our, unless there are any other questions, I'm gonna move on to our next panel. And I'd like to welcome to our virtual stage, Sue from Amino Capital. She's here in Silicon Valley like I am. Benjamin Chong from Right Click Capital. Christian Burns from Northridge Partners, and Northridge Partners is one of our sponsors, and thank you, Christian, for that. And I know Christian is also straddling this Sydney and Silicon Valley area as well. So then Dan Bennett from Our Crowd, the crowdfunding, huge crowdfunding conglomerate from Israel that does deals around the world now, and had some big news this past week with the Israel deal making. Bill Barty from Main Sequence Ventures. So thank you all for coming aboard and sharing your thoughts. It's a nice, very nice Sydney Harbor shot here. Thank you very much for showing that. Okay, so why don't we start the way we started with our prior panel, with each one of you telling us a little bit about what you do and why you do it, and you know, kind of the, and then we'll move into kind of the issues after that. But why don't we start with Christian?
Sure. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So I'm a partner at Northridge. I was one of the original founders back in 2004. We started our life off as investors in publicly listed technology stocks. I think someone commented earlier that, you know, we didn't really have a private capital market a long time ago. So we saw a lot of tech companies down here having to list on the ASX, which isn't a particularly good outcome when you're such a young technology company. So we found quite a lot of opportunity back then in that space. And then look, as the private capital market in Australia began to evolve and grow, we effectively diversified into being a technology-focused investment bank. So we still invest, but we're building up quite a large franchise in, I guess, external corporate advisory to technology companies. We have offices in Sydney, in Singapore. I was just about to launch an office in the United States where I first met Rebecca, and I think I made it out on one of the last planes from the US to Australia before everything closed down. So that's on hold at the moment, but we can talk about that later. We're seeing a lot of good opportunities at the moment, helping investments and clients move from Australia to the US or from Southeast Asia to the US, sort of in line with the narrative that Rebecca touched on before. So yeah, a bit of investing and a bit of corporate advisory work is what Northridge does, but specifically in technology.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Benjamin, do you want to go next?
Sure, really happy to. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Rebecca. I'm at Right Click Capital, and we invest in companies in Australia and New Zealand, particularly into early stage startups that are in software, IoT, or deep technology. So we love investing and supporting these founders as they hopefully build some industry-defining companies.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin. Bill Barty.
Thanks, Rebecca, and lovely to be here. Hello, everybody. So I'm a partner at Main Sequence Ventures. We are a deep tech venture fund. So everything we do, every company we invest in generally has a firm basis in either some sort of a hard science or hard engineering. The thesis is that if we can, if they can build a company around that, we can effectively build a moat, because what the products are generating are hard to replicate. Mostly we are Series A and seed investors and try to follow on in everything that we think is successful. And we've co-invested with Benjamin on a couple of things. So.
Indeed. Good to see you, Bill.
Well, you're both in Australia, so.
We are, yes, I'm in Sydney.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Dan, you're Israel, Sydney, right? Dan.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, Rebecca. And hey, everyone. Yeah, based between, well, I had been for the last 6 or 7 years sort of flying between Sydney and Tel Aviv and spending a lot of time in Hong Kong as well. But that world has shrunk a little bit and we're relying on Zoom, which has been a personally grounding experience, but a little bit different on the professional front.
Yeah.
But our business is focused on helping deep tech companies grow, very focused on also helping those companies generally originating out of Israel and the US in connecting into other geographies. We have offices across each continent, so where we feel very strongly capable of connecting into large multinationals and local partners to help those companies grow. We've got about just over $2 billion now of committed capital, and like a lot of the gents on the panel, very focused on deep tech. So lots of cybersecurity, data, AI, healthcare. A lot of the stuff that Israel does very well is how we established our business, and we're still very focused on those areas.
Very good. Sue. Hi, Sue.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
We're probably only a few miles apart, but here we are on the same screen. But Sue, from your perspective of Silicon Valley, tell us about what you do and what Amino Capital does.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everybody for having me. And we have been around for 8 years, and our fund is about $200 million. And then we are based at the Palo Alto, and then next to Stanford on Palm Drive. And we actually focus on seed to growth stage investments in big data and data-driven companies. And we have invested over 160 companies, and we have 21 exits, mostly to Google, Facebook, Amazon. And now we have like 7 unicorn, including the recent unicorn Chime Bank. And we have over 17 companies with valuation over 100 million. So pretty happy about that. And we actually, because most of our partners previously work at Google, and we're at Stanford, so we've seen a lot of returnees to Australia. So Rebecca invited us for this event, and really interesting Australia startups, because a lot of the returnees to Australia, they come back to Silicon Valley to raise money. So we've seen a lot of AI companies, and very promising, and Australian government's very tech-driven and open-minded to try their technologies. So we thought this is a great opportunity to get to know everybody. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Sue. So one of the issues in the Australia venture capital market, I think James also mentioned how much it had grown over the past year, but over the past couple years, even more so. And lately we've seen these 3 new funds or 3 other funds raise fairly large sums, Square Peg and Airtree and Blackbird. And that's actually been just over the past year. Is this going to put the Australian startups on the scene now, more so in the past? Where do you see, what is the status of the Australian venture capital market? What kind of difference is this kind of fundraising going to make?
Well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge people like Bill, who have been part of the Australian venture capital scene for a long time. Before Main Sequence, Bill was at Blackbird, and before Blackbird, he was a partner at Southern Cross Venture Capital, which had offices both in Australia and the United States. And I think folks like Bill have been flying the flag for a very long time and encouraging investors to not only dip their toe in the water, but perhaps more than one toe. And I think what we're hearing with some more of these announcements of commitments to funds is a very healthy thing. Now, we as a country on a per capita basis still invest a whole lot less than other countries such as Singapore and Israel, let alone the United States. But I think we are in the right direction. And one of the things that has occurred, as James would have shared earlier, is that there has been more local capital now that has been able to follow on into later stage rounds of financing. So if you have a look at the statistics, and I was reviewing this yesterday, in 2019, in the second quarter of the calendar year, so these are the months April, May and June, about $500 million was invested into startups in Australia across about 100 companies. If you compare that same 3-month period in 2020, about $750 million was invested, so more money, which is a positive sign. Interestingly, the number of deals fell by approximately half, which meant that the average deal size increased significantly, but it is certainly a sign that the companies that got funded perhaps 3 years ago and then 18 months ago got more funding in recent time. And I think that's a really positive thing. Clearly, it does show up the need for us to ensure that angels, family and friends, and even earlier stage venture capital funds are investing at the very early stages so that there is the pipeline of deal flow to do later deals with the larger funds that are now available.
Okay, that sounds good. Bill, since you just got a very big compliment from Benjamin, I have to put you on the spot here and ask for your perspective as a long-time investor in the Australian venture capital scene. Where do you think, what's the current status? Is Australia still emerging? Is it emerged? Where is it? But where is the Australia venture capital market? What are the challenges it faces? What are the areas of opportunity?
Yeah, well, look, thanks, thanks Rebecca, and thanks Benjamin. It's very nice of you. Obviously, Benjamin doesn't know enough people because I'm not the only person who's done this. But look, I think I think Australia could be, maybe a poor analogy is we're in our teenage years. Before we were kind of a toddler, we still, it's terrific that there is a lot of money, or a fair amount of money that is coming into the system. It's still, some people may question, is there too much money in the system now? And my answer is no. And the reason is because we still, we still have a relatively, as Benjamin said, a relatively small per capita amount of money. And we don't have, a huge amount of competition amongst the venture firms. There is competition, of course, but there's a lot more cooperation. So if you look at it, all of our portfolios, they are probably more different than similar. And that's because there's lots and lots of companies that are being formed. The entrepreneurship has been going up quite substantially over the past 5-6 years. And you are now seeing the university students and the younger folks no longer want jobs at the investment banks or law firms. They want to start companies. So I would say that definitely Australia is on the upswing in terms of entrepreneurship and company formation. There's quite a strong education system here, and quite good education, especially in the STEM subjects. And there are some clear areas where Australia is world leading. And so that all bodes well for investors and for us. And, we're sort of pleased to be part of it at the moment. So, okay. And I don't see anything but growth.
Okay. But beyond adolescence.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
Hopefully we can still experience a pubescent growth spurt, right, Bill?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Good comment.
All right. So what about valuations? So Benjamin, you said basically there were fewer deals, but the deal size was bigger. So does that mean valuations are also climbing for investing in Australian tech startups? And how does it compare to other markets? Maybe Sue can offer some comment on that as well. Are valuations climbing? Are we going to see some more unicorns coming out of Australia?
Yeah, we will definitely. Hopefully we have a few. I think that the ubiquity of pricing and valuations is pretty well understood around the world now.
Yeah.
And so and this is probably an overgeneralization, but the early stage companies here there probably is a valuation difference, maybe between us and between Australia and the US, or Australia and China. But I would say, once you're sort of Series A, Series B, there's probably parity or close to parity. And the reason is because these companies, as they raise their later rounds, the financings come from multiple venture firms around the world. So, you would have Felicis and Sequoia China and somebody local here participate all in the same round. So that valuation all is, is the same for everybody. So it might be a little bit of a difference in the early rounds, but in the later rounds, it's virtually the same. Kind of my observation.
Okay. All right.
I actually think from seeing some of the deep tech deals out of Israel and the US, I still think Australia is a little treasure trove, which we shouldn't say out loud too widely. I still think that valuations are more attractive here maybe than some other places around the world. And we're still very fortunate that our founders in Australia are a little more rational on their expectations or realistic on their expectations than in other parts of the world. And that might be part of being, I think teenagers normally can be a bit of a pain in the chops, but I think in this situation, it might work in our favor because they're, I guess maybe a bit less confident than they might be in other geographies around pricing. I mean, we still will see in Israel and the US, seed rounds getting away at $50 million US. And, frankly, there's not a lot of juice left in that sort of, investment, unless you're really confident that this thing's going to hit $1 billion. There's not much of a multiple there for a VC firm reflecting the risk profile. So for me, I think Australian founders are a little bit more reasonable in their expectations, and I think we're quite lucky, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the Australian funds returns, performing really attractively, and a lot of families and investors that have supported those funds have been rewarded with very nice sort of returns.
Yeah, the returns must be good or you wouldn't see these new funds, and also the follow-on funds. Some groups raising a sequence of funds, so the returns must be pretty good.
Well, we saw, for those that didn't see the article, we saw obviously Blackbird in the AFR talking about their first fund having an 11.9 times multiple, which is, that's a global fund killer, that is. I mean, that's an incredible number, but, obviously off the back of Canva, but some other great investments. So, I think we're probably punching above our weight in a really nice way.
Uh-huh. Good.
I think Silicon Valley can also be very, some of the company can be very undervalued. And then I don't believe that any investor want to invest in very high value company. So it's really just like, for example, our partner invested in Zoom in year of 2011. So the valuation is really low. And then everybody that, invests in Zoom actually made money. And then even Sequoia made a lot of money. And then even I invested in Zoom when they went IPO, and then I still make money. So as long as the company is undervalued, we're happy. So I think right now, definitely a lot of late stage company, even though during pandemic, a lot of money actually in the market, both in Australia and also Silicon Valley. And because a lot of the business, they make people's life better, make work better. And then one of the companies doing food delivery of our portfolio, and then they recently raised another 35 million from DST. And then because they were actually doing, so it's a bunch of Chinese people started this food delivery for Chinese people before pandemic. But now a lot of my American friends, they order from there because they have time. They learn how to cook Asian food, and the materials from we. So it's just to make people's life easier during pandemic, and then they stand out. Valuation is very high, but it's okay.
WEE?
Yes, are you a user as well?
No, not yet. I like Chinese food though. I like Asian food. So, okay, well, good. So, all right, let me ask, since we've been talking about some of the success stories out of Australia, what's the next tech titan and where it's going to come from globally?
Well, I mean, look, I can just talk about a couple things, and this is obviously biased because it's in our portfolio, but we have a company called V2 Food that we have high hopes for, and you can think of them sort of as the next impossible, if you will. This is a business that we actually created the company. So the part of the strategy is company creation. So we created this company, partnered with Competitive Foods, which is Jack Cowan, who owns all the Hungry Jacks and largest shareholder in Domino's Pizza. And we created a company that essentially is a plant-based meat company. So it's got all of its, it's got its product in all of the Hungry Jacks around, all the Burger King's Hungry Jacks around Australia. There is a big march up into Southeast Asia and to China. So launches are getting ready there, and there's been lots of work being done in those particular markets. So I think over the next few months, you're going to see lots of big things happening. And it's all around the theme of we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, and you got to be able to feed them. Australia, I think, as Duco said earlier, is really known for its, one of the great advantages here is there's a lot of innovation in agriculture and a lot of innovation around plants and plant systems and cleanliness of the food system. So B2 and companies like it are taking advantage of that, and there is the chance to be suppliers to the world, especially Southeast Asia and to China, of enormous amounts of food. So it's a theme that we're riding, and hopefully it continues.
Yeah, I think that's great that you had the idea for the company or idea for the startup, and then you recruited a founder to do it, or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, as some of you know, we're also kind of associated with CSIRO, which is the National Science Agency, and we looked inside CSIRO, and they have a very large sort of food and agriculture group, and we got them to help us formulate the protein from plants. So we got that right. We also went out and found a CEO who was ex-Mars, ex-PepsiCo, and had built businesses inside those large businesses and clearly understood the entire food industry worldwide, as well as all the supply chains, all the challenges, et cetera. And he quickly built a team. So it just worked. It worked well for us and is working well for us so far. And so it's, you know, it's part of the strategy for us is to do, you know, 3 or 4 of these per portfolio, in addition to investing in other things. Yeah. So it just, you know, we're able to do it for a number of reasons, and it helps our returns too.
Yeah, I bet. So what do you think about that strategy?
I think it's really something that we actually like to do as well. And then, so basically, we have an incubator, and we have 40 people that actually, before pandemic, we have a 40 people office next to Stanford. So we often work with faculty members or, you know, like laboratory spin-offs, and then start a company in our office. And then we found that 4 areas that people actually are interested in. During and even after pandemic, we predict one is video conferencing. So because Zoom could have a chance to be the next infrastructure. So we've seen a lot of social apps, or a lot of the meeting social apps, especially, they are built exclusively on top of Zoom. So Zoom could be the next ecosystem. So there is already Zoom Marketplace for apps launched already. And then a second one is online banking. And one of our portfolio company, we were their first money, Chime Bank, and they're doing very well. And then they actually inspired a lot of people trying to develop different kind of products. And then they were trying to actually work with students. So we were seeing a lot of students got inspired, but fintech and healthcare were highly regulated. So we're not disrupted by social mobile. So they might have a chance for, for AI. And so those PhD students might want to take Chime's data and then start something, maybe a loan product or something. Third one is consumer. Like I said, food delivery is definitely one of them. And fourth one is healthcare. It's very strong. And so one of our portfolio company, Goreo, so they were using blood for whole genome sequencing and then predict 50 different kind of cancer for early diagnosis. So that kind of like inspired a lot of Stanford PhDs, started the fourth generation sequencer, something like that. So those are the 4 areas we felt like researchers and ex-Googlers wanted to actually get into, because especially as I said, healthcare and fintech previously have highly regulated. So now they can utilizing AI as a Trojan horse and let the doctors to use their product. So yeah.
Right. So you made me think about, it's interesting to hear about some other sectors beyond, social media and software and all that, to hear about ag tech and agricultural tech. So it just makes me wonder about biotech as well. We haven't really talked too much about biotech yet tonight. And of course, the big unknown is the vaccine, right? Which market is going to get that first besides Russia, which hasn't really gone into the phase 3 trials, I understand. Does China have a chance? The US, is Australia in on this, the biotech, the vaccine race?
Yeah, I mean, Australia is right on top of this. Interestingly enough, they have one of the very few places in the world where they have a very highly secure bio facility down in a place called Geelong, which is outside of Melbourne. And they're doing a lot of testing, not only of the Oxford vaccine, but also one out of the University of Queensland and another one out of the US. And so they're working, interestingly, they're working with people globally, and I think this is what you're seeing in the vaccine market in general, is there's kind of global collaboration between scientists and scientific groups around the world. And Australia's contribution is quite important, because they're working with all the animal models and all the mathematic models and going through all the first phases of the vaccine trials with all these companies just to make sure that they are safe and get to the next phase. So I think Australia will be one of the first to have, well, hopefully everybody has a vaccine at the same time, but they'll certainly be at the top of the list. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah, that's interesting to know. Thank you for that. Dan from Israel?
Yeah, we actually invested in the major, or the sort of most prominent vaccine company in Israel called Migvax. And they've been inoculating chickens actually from an avian flu, which is a sort of close relative, or very close relative of COVID. And they've been doing that for a number of years very effectively. And why we were excited about Migvax was cost of vaccination is very low given the cost of a chicken. So, their technology as a platform being flipped into humans makes it much more accessible to countries potentially that don't have the same wealth profile of an Australia or a US that can pay what they can for the vaccine. We want to make sure that the whole world gets the benefit of the vaccine, and it's also orally delivered. So it doesn't need the same level of refrigeration. It doesn't need, a nurse or a doctor or, a professional to administer it. It can literally, like a polio vaccine, it's taken on the tongue. So we're quite excited about it. We don't think we'll be the first one out of the gates. It's probably going to be Moderna or Gilead or, the Oxford crew, or, they're looking well ahead. And Australia's also looking very strong. But for us, the challenge, I think, for the vaccine will be getting it to the whole population in a cost-effective manner, and also the requirement for boosters. It seems like there's a view that, a single vaccination will not be sufficient. and that will, like the, I don't like to draw an analogy to the flu because this isn't a flu, but the same way in the flu, you need a booster every year for different strains, you'll probably need a booster for COVID every 6 to 12 months. So that being delivered in an oral fashion versus intravenous makes it extremely attractive. And, we've built quite a great team there with that company. We basically, like Bill was mentioning, it's a company we almost established to some extent ourselves because we were very excited about the technology they had available. So Israel's definitely in the race, but it's very hard to beat the US when they put, government funding behind this. I mean, it's a big weight of money that they can deliver, both for the technology and also for the production, like the Gates Foundation, et cetera, committing hundreds of millions of dollars to mass production.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very interesting subject, and certainly a topic to watch for all of us for many reasons. But let me go back to the venture capital subject of flows, Silicon Valley, China, Australia, and venture capital money coming in from Silicon Valley into Australia, and Silicon Valley companies wanting to go into or Australian companies wanting to go into Silicon Valley. Is Silicon Valley still kind of the gold standard, or has Silicon Valley lost some of its oomph?
Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think for right or for wrong, a lot of companies still think that the path to take is to go from Australia over to Silicon Valley. I think there's been pressure put on companies to think that way down in Australia for a while, for a bunch of reasons. I think what that ignores is the complexities of, we do have a great market down here. There's a lot of opportunity to build a great business just down here, but more importantly, test a concept down here before moving offshore. And I think, I'd advise companies to just generally really think carefully about, is it Asia? Is it Europe? There's some certain negatives to going into the US, despite the, highly attractive capital sources, in that, it's a big country. It's effectively multiple markets. There's a lot of complexity to manage there, both in terms of regulation, but just also consumer behavior, which, all of that sort of stuff provides opportunity. But I think, going forward, I think Australian companies are getting a little bit better at trying to figure out where the best fit is for their products and their teams globally. So I don't think the luster has disappeared by any stretch of the imagination. As I said before, we're in the process of launching an office in the US, and that is not because we want to start investing in US companies. It's because we're finding a lot of our investments and our clients, both in Southeast Asia and Australia, they do have a credible business plan to go to the US. And so our job is to have boots on the ground over there to help facilitate that and ultimately bring in US capital onto their balance sheet so that they benefit from that network that comes with that sort of thing. So I think it's evolving. I think before it was very binary for an Australian company. I think now, fortunately, there's a lot of options for us to grow going forward into different markets.
Okay, thank you. Bill, you were going to say something?
I mean, look, I think a lot of Australian companies want to go to the US for a couple of reasons. I mean, historically, it's a country that's got similar cultural systems. The language is somewhat similar. It's also the largest market in the world as far as buyers of technology go. I do think, however, that increasingly, what we're seeing is we are seeing quite a bit of attention, moving from talking about it to actually doing it up into Southeast Asia as customers, because I think the Australian startups are figuring out that Southeast Asia and China is a terrific market. It may be a bit more complex to navigate just because of not having done it as much before and not being as familiar. But if you have a partner and or if you have somebody to guide you, that these are markets that can be enormously successful and enormously profitable for startups. So while the default might be to go to the US or the UK initially, there's quite a bit of work going on in terms of how do we also get our products in these other markets where there's the need for them and the demand. So
right.
I'd say it's more of a broader outlook, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Bill. And one of the examples is one of our portfolio companies, which is in the world of cybersecurity, an area that I think has gotten increasing attention as there's been higher levels of work from home. And they have got a team of people who are ex-Palantir, and they are specifically targeting a segment of businesses in the Southeast Asian region. And they've recognised that there are peculiarities or different ways of being able to provide a product to specifically meet that market, and the traction has been amazing. And I think it shows that whilst the issues of cybersecurity are somewhat global, in this case, having a localized approach or a more regional approach has paid huge dividends in terms of being able to get the attention of security officers and CTOs in those organizations to try the product and then to put it into production.
Right. So, yeah, go ahead, Sue.
Sorry. I think it's definitely an opportunity for foreign investors to invest in Australian company. As I mentioned before, we actually, so the deal source of Amino, we invest in maybe GSD, we always call it Stanford, ex-Googlers, or we were taking advantage of data and we track talents. So a lot of them actually went back to Australia. And the advice for them is that they definitely have to travel between Australia and Silicon Valley or Australia and Southeast Asia. Totally agree. Because oftentimes they found that, oh, I'm the only one, I'm the best in Sydney. But if they're in Silicon Valley or in China, and they will be if they can say that they're able to do something, and there are tons of companies around them and claim that they can do the same thing. So competitiveness is definitely very important. But we found that those companies, the talent's really good. So we always advise them. So they actually do live in flight. So they actually travel to Silicon Valley maybe every other quarter or something. And that's not enough. But I do actually introduce them to some tech giants, Google or Facebook, and for them to get to know the ecosystem, and that actually keep the relationship warm for the whole quarter, and they have something to do. And then I think that's kind of important. But in the meantime, we laser focus on those people that actually return from Silicon Valley, because venture investing is a local business. So it's not very easy to actually work with entrepreneur you never met before.
Yeah, so you're investing almost exclusively in the U.S., right?
We have startups in every continent actually, but they all somehow worked for our partners at Google before, or previous laboratory at Stanford before. So somebody that we know very well.
They all have U.S. origins.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So now that we've gotten about 4 months into this remote working and remote deal making, do you think that the remote deal making is here to stay? Is this going to substitute the live deal making? Ever take the place of it? What do you think, Benjamin?
Look, we've certainly been forced, all of us have been forced to take first meetings, second meetings, and multiple meetings over technology like this. And in fact, we've conducted a lot of due diligence through this type of method. I think if and when we're able to travel again, there will be possibly more meetings that we can conduct using technology like this. However, as Sue mentioned, there is nothing like meeting face to face, and that venture capital is very much a local thing. So I'm certainly chomping at the bit to be able to go and visit some of the portfolio companies, the cities where travel is a little more restricted. And I think there will certainly be no substitute for meeting people face to face. And I think we are the sum of our experiences. And I think part of the investment experiences, as well as being able to help companies in the portfolio and founders at large, will rely on us meeting with them face to face.
So with the deal making pace slowed down because it's more difficult to do due diligence over online than it would be if you were to shake somebody's hand? Well, impacted the deal making pace?
Go, Christin.
I actually think it's kind of the reverse of what we're seeing at the moment. I think since COVID, we're up to our fourth transaction / investment. I think COVID's, obviously been challenging, but there's a lot of opportunity that's been generated by COVID. Sort of touching on the initial question. So of those 4 transactions, I think 3 of them we'd started pre-COVID and had to complete in this environment. And that was okay because, you'd met a lot of the people that were involved in the companies and the investors. One of the things that we just did last week was close out quite a large investment in a New Zealand company where we had never met in person any of the stakeholders, none of the investors, the company, nothing. It was our first deal that was purely consummated and executed during COVID and over Zoom. So it's possible, and I think it's going to have to continue by its very nature. And I think there's some nuances in how you go about that, but yeah, it's happening. There's a lot of deals going on purely on Zoom where you've never met anyone.
I think for early stage, short term, no problem, but long term, I think that has to be solution for it, because the reason why we were first money in Zoom because Eric Yuan plays soccer with one of our partners. So that has to be replaced with something. And then the reason why we were first money in Chime is because one of the founders, Ryan King, used to work with one of our partners before he joined Facebook at the company called Plaxo. So you have to know that person, especially for early stage, you're investing in the people and the team. So in the long run, definitely there are a lot of challenges, but the short term is fine. And later stage deals, I don't think it's necessary to meet the CEO anyway. So you have a lot of data to crunch.
It's other than sounding like I need to pay better attention to my football companions and what businesses they're involved in. That's the takeaway from this session for me this morning. No, I think there's an element of treading water. I think, yeah, sure, we can get some transactions done, but if we look at our portfolio companies that had been planning to relocate or enter new markets, it's a lot harder now. They've got to work through distribution partners. They're not able to actually travel themselves to establish all of the core relationships that would give them the best chance of a deployment or a mobilization into a new geography successfully. So I think, human beings are very adaptive, and we're doing our very best to, make the best of the situation and still keep business going. But there's definitely, realistically, there's a lot of challenges in helping these companies grow. So, yep, we can do the stage 1, we can get the money in and help them prepare for deployment. But if we were in this holding cycle for, indefinitely, then I think we'd start to see some real problems, and we'd probably have to reshape how we do our transactions because we'd have other limitations around us. So, yes, plenty of stuff still happening for us, particularly in the COVID space, a lot of COVID related technology. But yeah, we're very cognizant of the limitations we're facing.
Well, I would think it would be even more difficult with fundraising, dealing with institutional investors.
It's funny you say that. I mean,
conservative, aren't they?
Well, I mean, basically as almost a full-time fundraiser, in my own role, to some extent. What's interesting is I think because there's no yield anywhere to be had, interest rates are at 0. Where a family office is actually able to put their money, I think ventures become, even in a risk-adjusted context, far more attractive. People are very scared of the dislocated public markets. They prefer to do something for the medium term. So ventures more attractive than ever. So we're actually raising, more money this year than last year, which is a huge surprise, frankly. However, yes, people are cautious. Yes, they're selective on what they're investing in. And yes, there's a number of, companies within our portfolio that have been adversely impacted by COVID, and we've got to do our best to help them, but there are challenges out there.
Yeah, but a lot of your fundraising comes from high net worths and angels, right? not necessarily the pension money, the endowment money that I would think would be.
Yeah, but if we look at Yale, you look at the Yale endowment numbers, I think they're now edging towards, 30% of their overall funds being invested in venture and technology. So if anything, they're moving more and more aggressively into the venture space. I think Australian institutions have gotten very excited about venture. If you just look at, the 3 funds that just closed, you had more than a handful of Australian super funds supporting them. So, yeah, I think there's arguments in both directions. People are conservative, but they need to put their money somewhere, and super keeps getting, their piles of money every month from all of their members, and they've got to invest it somewhere, and they've got limited places to house that at the moment.
So we don't have much institutional money, and because the stock market is doing so well, so we should say there are more angels investing in our fund.
There are more what?
There are more individuals invested in our fund recently because the stock market.
Oh, I see. I see. Looking for returns.
Right.
Like Dan was just pointing out, they got to go somewhere. So even though venture capital may be pretty risky, right? Is it still true that 1 in 10 companies, about 1 in 10 makes it?
They need to invest in risky asset.
Okay. Bill, any comment?
Yeah, I think there's a whether it's fundraising or whether it's completing a transaction or dealing with an entrepreneur or a startup. I mean, there certainly has been a change. I think there's a difference between where we work and how we work. So where we're working right now is a lot over Zoom or a lot over whatever video platform you use. However, how you work is quite different from where you work. And I think for us, we have to figure out things like how do we actually do proper due diligence, do proper customer interviews, et cetera, and make sure that we have all the how sort of scoped out and figured out. And then where we do it, either in person, next to the customer, or over video, is an implementation of the how. So I think it's going to be a mix of both video and when societies are able to open up and be a little closer, depending upon your jurisdiction. I'm sure all of us will get together and have coffees and discussions while we're 3 or 4 meters apart. It's going to be a mix going forward.
Or have a red wine.
Have a red wine.
Okay. Well, look, I wanted to shift a little bit into one final topic, and I'll just share a screen here as well while we do that. Talk about the China tech scene and the tech titans that have emerged and how it's all impacted the global scene. So I think I would like to ask all of you about a question that's been on my mind about this decoupling is talking about a China internet and a rest of the world internet. How do you see that impacting the growth of tech startups if China is separate? We're hearing a lot about this decoupling, right? Is this going to cause Chinese tech startups to stay more, within their own realm, cause other startups outside of China not to even look into China as a potential market? What do you think of this whole, what's the impact of the US-China tech rivalry, the whole China, non-China internet? Is this something that is on your mind, or does it impact how you're thinking, what you're doing? Let's talk a little bit about that before we sign off.
Look, it's certainly been a topic of conversation amongst colleagues, particularly when it comes to which markets some of our portfolio companies might target. as a priority. And I think there have been conversations around, if we have companies that target one particular market, is there the risk that they might shut out another or other markets in future? I think it depends on the type of technology, and it also depends on the type of application of that technology.
Do you have a, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I think it's a good point. I mean, I think it's also worth saying that no matter, history has shown that no matter what the geopolitical tensions are at the time, it doesn't stop entrepreneurs from thinking and starting innovative businesses. So I don't think, whatever, whoever is in office or whatever disagreements there are, we'll continue to see to grow because people are smart and they want to do. You talk to the people on the street, they really would love to be able to do business with anybody all over the world. So that's sort of at the grassroots level. What events or challenges I think governments have, probably where method has what some would say is a dual use kind of a technology, and that is where it could be used for commercial purposes and also purposes.
Okay. Benjamin, what do you think on that question of the decoupling and its impact on how tech startups grow, how you invest?
Yeah, well, as I said, we have had a lot of conversations with some of our portfolio companies, and some of it has to do with, is the moat that they have a technical moat? And if so, how is that going to be protected? And if there are going to be perhaps political types of decoupling for that type of technology, might it be better to focus on one geography v another?
Right.
And I'm speaking a little obtusely at the moment because it is a sensitive subject, sure. and I think it is different for each of the companies that we speak with, because there's considerations around who their investors might be, right. who their eventual acquirer might be, or if they were to perhaps go public, what market might they go public on?
Right. Well, is there more, are the startups in Australia thinking twice about taking China capital? They are in Silicon Valley, so what about in Australia?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more of that down here now. And I think where the situation is worsening is before there were particular sectors that if you're involved in as an Australian company, there were some obvious red flags in terms of bringing China money on the register. And I think unfortunately now, given some of the uncertainty that we're seeing around some of the reactions from China with regards to some of the topical issues down here, that's broadened a little bit. I think you're finding businesses that don't necessarily sit in obvious industries, whether it's infrastructure or banking, just having general concern about taking that money onto their register. And now it's flowing all the way into some of the M&A activity that we're seeing, particularly in terms of trade sales. People just aren't including potential Chinese acquirers now in a process just because they feel that uncertainty may, affect how they can generate competitive tension, slow things down. And so, I think you're seeing it across the board at the moment. I think we're probably going a little bit too far in terms of our concern, but time will tell.
I think 2 years ago at Rebecca's event with Carefully, we kind of already see this coming.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And then 2 years ago was the decoupling from Chinese money, and now it's WeChat and TikTok ban. So to us, because we invested in data, so to us, it's all about data. So it's actually about who should own the data. And US and China have long have disagreements And for example, like security camera and sense time, so successful. They have security camera all over China, and then government is actually largest buyer. And then, but it's very, very expensive. So it's not possible for individuals to pay like $5,000 per year for security camera storage and stuff. But now, success, like 2 years later, there is a company we invested called Wise. So they offer a camera only $19, and then the monthly pay is over $1.50. So you can have exactly same type of, security surveillance, just like in China. But this is individual owned data. So I have like 5 camera security, Wise security camera at my house. So this is 2 different ways. So I think in the US, this type of tech-driven solution is more sustainable. And then individual owned data is more sustainable than in China. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. What about the whole 5G tech race and Huawei? We know where Australia stands on that, but how is that impacting tech evolution in China if you have cut out a major supplier? Anyone from Australia want to comment on that? The whole 5G situation.
Well, first of all, I don't think 5G causes coronavirus. And secondly, I think it is clear that Australia has said no to Huawei. And I think the concern is that are we in X years' time going to have a number of countries that possibly do not operate well, at least from a technology perspective, with other countries. And I think that's a little of a scary situation, because since the growth of internet access in the 90s and into the 2000s, what the internet has promised is the ability to communicate with people all over the world using internet protocol, and to bring people together. And with the advent of even 3G and 4G LTE networks, the ability for us to travel, to roam, to make use of the broadband internet mobile was ubiquitous and seamless. And I think one of the risks is that we might need to go back to those bad old days where you carry your CDMA phone as well as a GSM phone.
Let's hope not. Well, thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, everyone, actually, for sharing your views. I think everyone benefited from that, and it was a very lively discussion. So I appreciate all the comments. And let me just make some closing remarks. Anyhow, if you're interested in some of the topics that we discussed, Tech Titans of China, right there, is on Amazon, in Kindle, audio, paperback, and available in Australia as well. So thank you again. If you like this show, then please join us for our traditional Ask a VC Anything series, where we have one VC. Instead of a whole bunch of VCs on the screen, we have one for 1 hour, and we have actually, usually it's a little bit livelier on the Q&A, so please join us for our next Ask a VC Anything. We're going to be going to India. This is the fellow Mohanjit Jolly. He helped to set up DFJ, Draper Fisher Jervison in India. So he's going to be on. And then following him, we'll have the VC Roy Bahat from Bloomberg Beta. Bloomberg Beta is Michael Bloomberg's fund, which invests in some overlooked areas. So that's going to be very interesting. Overlooked emerging areas, I should add. And so please join us for that. And please check out what we do regularly at silicondragonventures.com if you want to reach us. Here's a good email below, news@silicondragonventures.com. And that's about it. I just want to say thank you for staying with us. I know it was a long show. We covered a lot. And I would encourage anyone who missed the show to please ask for the replay, okay? We recorded the whole thing. It's available as replay. So thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
As I forgot to do the traditional toast. I think it's because in Australia it's morning, but when we do the Silicon Valley time, we have a traditional toast. So, okay, thank you. Take care. I'll do it. I think I'm the only one, aside from Sue, who's in the time zone to drink any red wine at the moment. Okay, take care. Bye now.